Welcome to wisdom and blessing. In this quiet moment, the body is invited to soften and the breath may slow without effort. There is nothing to solve, nowhere to go. Tonight's story explores a gentle truth that events in life are not random, and even what feels confusing may be quietly shaping the path. As the night deepens, the story begins. Night rested gently over the mountains, not as darkness, but as a kind of listening. Mist moved slowly between tall pine trees, and the moon hung low, pale and patient, as though it had nowhere else to be. At the edge of a narrow valley stood an old temple, built of stone and wood darkened by centuries of rain. No road led directly to it. Only a winding path, softened by moss and fallen needles, guided those who arrived. A small river flowed beside the temple wall. Its water did not rush. It moved as if time itself had loosened its grip. Within the temple grounds, a young monk walked alone beneath lantern light. His steps were measured, not because he was careful, but because the night invited slowness. The monk had lived here for many seasons, long enough to know the sound of each bell before it rang, long enough to recognize the scent of rain before it fell. Yet something remained unsettled within him. It was not pain, it was not fear. It was a quiet question that returned again and again, like a leaf drifting back to the same place on the riverbank. Why did things happen as they did? The monk had arrived at the temple years earlier carrying no great tragedy. There had been no dramatic loss, no single moment that pushed him toward the mountains. Instead, there had been a steady accumulation of small confusions, effort that led nowhere, kindness that was misunderstood. Moments when harm arrived uninvited, without warning or reason. Each time, the monk had been told the same words by people in the world below. Everything happens for a reason. The words sounded comforting, but inside, they echoed without meaning. On this night, the temple bell rang once, low and deep. The sound moved outward through the valley, touching stone, water, and air before dissolving into silence. After the evening rituals ended, the monk did not return to his chamber. Instead, he walked toward the river. There, beneath an old cedar tree, sat the temple's teacher. The teacher was very old, so old that his age no longer mattered. His back curved gently, like a branch shaped by snow rather than force. He did not appear to be meditating. He did not appear to be waiting. He was simply there. The monk stopped a few steps away, unsure whether to speak. The river answered for him, murmuring softly over smooth stones. Finally, the monk bowed and sat beside the teacher. For a long time, neither spoke. Wind moved through bamboo. A lantern flickered. The teacher picked up a small stone from the ground and turned it slowly in his hand, as if greeting it. "Master," the monk said at last, his voice quiet but steady, "people say that everything happens for a reason, but some events leave only confusion. Some bring effort without reward. Some arrive without explanation." The teacher placed the stone back on the earth. "Does the river explain itself?" he asked. The monk followed the teacher's gaze. Moonlight shimmered across the surface of the water, breaking and reforming with every movement. "No," the monk said. "Yet it continues," the teacher replied. The teacher reached down and let his fingers touch the water. Ripples spread outward, widening until they touched the opposite bank. "Reasons are not always meant to be understood," the teacher said. "Some exist only to move the river forward." The monk felt the words settle, not in the mind, but deeper, somewhere behind thought. That night, as the monk returned to his chamber, the question did not disappear, but it grew quieter, like a river seen from a distance, still moving, even when its direction could not yet be seen. Morning arrived without announcement. Light did not break the darkness, it softened it. Mist still lingered between the trees, and the temple roofs glistened faintly as though the night had not fully let go. Somewhere beyond the valley, a bird called once, then fell silent again. The monk rose before the bell. The floor beneath his feet was cool. The air carried the faint scent of damp wood and old incense. As he stepped outside, the river greeted him with the same steady presence it had offered the night before. After the morning chants, the teacher summoned the monk with a simple gesture. No words were exchanged. The teacher picked up his walking staff and turned toward the narrow path that led down the mountain. The monk followed. The path descended slowly, winding between stones worn smooth by centuries of passing feet. Roots crossed the earth like quiet reminders of patience. Each step required attention, not effort. As they walked, the monk noticed how the valley changed with the light. Shadows withdrew gently. Leaves shimmered with dew, each drop holding a small reflection of the sky. The teacher stopped beside a fallen tree that lay across the path. It had once been tall. Now it rested quietly, half covered in moss. "Why did it fall?" the teacher asked. The monk examined the tree. Its trunk bore no sign of lightning, no visible wound. "Perhaps age," the monk said, "or wind, or roots weakened by rain." The teacher nodded. "All true," he said, "and none complete." They stepped over the tree and continued. Further down the path, the sound of voices drifted upward. A small village rested at the mountain's base. Its rooftops clustered like stones beside a stream. Smoke rose from chimneys. Morning life was beginning. As they entered the village, a woman stood by the roadside, her shoulders tense, her hands clasped tightly together. Beside her lay a broken cartwheel. She looked up when she saw the monks. "It snapped without warning," she said, her voice tight. "I was meant to leave before sunrise. Now everything is delayed." The teacher knelt beside the wheel, turning it gently. "This wood has carried many journeys," he said. "It did not break today alone." The woman frowned. "But today is when it matters," she replied. The teacher smiled, not unkindly. "Today is always when it matters." The monk helped lift the cart aside. Together, they adjusted the load, easing the weight from the damaged wheel. A neighbor soon arrived, offering a spare piece of timber. As the wheel was repaired, the woman's breath slowed. Her shoulders dropped. "I was angry," she admitted, "at the road, at the cart, at the delay." The teacher stood. "Anger often arrives when the path changes," he said. They left the village as quietly as they had entered. The path climbed again, steeper now. The monk felt his breath deepen with each step, not from strain, but from rhythm. At a bend in the trail, the teacher paused once more. Below them, the village appeared small. The broken wheel could no longer be seen. "Some reasons reveal themselves quickly," the teacher said. "Others never rise to the surface." The monk listened. "When a path bends," the teacher continued, "it is not asking to be understood. It is asking to be walked." They reached a clearing where wind moved freely through tall grass. The teacher stopped and turned. "Tomorrow," he said, "the monk will carry water from the upper spring." The monk bowed. As they returned toward the temple, clouds gathered slowly, thickening the air. Rain arrived before the first bell of evening, gentle at first, then steady. The monk watched water slide down stone steps, each drop finding its way without question. That night, sleep came more easily. The question still existed, but it no longer demanded an answer. It waited, like the river, trusting the current. Before dawn, the mountain was neither asleep nor awake. It existed in a quiet pause between breaths. The temple bell had not yet sounded when the monk rose. Outside, the air was cool and dense, carrying the scent of wet earth from the night's rain. Clouds still clung to the higher slopes, moving slowly as if reluctant to leave. The monk washed his face at the stone basin. The water was cold. It did not shock, it clarified. He lifted the wooden buckets from their hooks. They were smooth from years of use, their handles shaped by countless hands that had carried the same weight along the same path. The upper spring lay higher than any other water source near the temple. It was older than the monastery itself, hidden among rocks and roots where few ventured unless sent. The teacher had given no explanation, only the instruction. The monk began the climb. The path narrowed as it rose, twisting between stones slick with moss. Mist thickened with each step, blurring distance and direction until the world seemed to exist only a few paces ahead. His breath fell into rhythm with his movement. Inhale, step, exhale, step. At times, the ground softened beneath his feet. At others, it hardened into uneven stone. The monk adjusted without thought, guided by attention rather than effort. When he reached the spring, the mist parted slightly, revealing a small pool cradled by rock. Water surfaced silently, clear and steady, as if rising from a deeper place, untouched by weather. The monk knelt and filled the buckets carefully. They grew heavy at once. As he lifted them, his shoulders tightened. The handles pressed into his palms, familiar yet insistent. The descent was slower. Each step required balance. Each breath carried weight. Halfway down, the monk's foot slipped. Water spilled onto the stones, vanishing immediately into the earth. The monk paused. For a brief moment, irritation flickered. Not strong, but present. A thought arose, quiet but clear. This water was difficult to carry, and now it was lost. He stood still, listening to the sound of his own breath. The thought passed. The monk adjusted his grip and continued. By the time he reached the temple, his arms trembled slightly. The buckets were lighter now, though he had not intended them to be. The teacher waited near the kitchen door. He said nothing as the monk set the buckets down. Together, they poured the water into a large clay vessel. Steam rose faintly as it met the warmer air inside. Only then did the teacher speak. "Tomorrow," he said, "the monk will carry water again." The monk bowed. Days passed. Each morning before dawn, the monk climbed to the upper spring. Each day, the path changed slightly. Rain softened the earth. Wind shifted branches. Stones loosened, then settled again. Sometimes, the monk spilled water. Sometimes, he arrived without losing a single drop. No comment was made. The weight remained the same. On the seventh morning, the monk noticed something new. At a bend in the path, where water had spilled repeatedly over days, the soil had darkened. Small shoots pressed upward, fragile but determined. The monk paused, observing. He had not planted anything there. He had not intended to nourish the ground. Yet, life had responded. He continued on. Later that day, as he returned empty-handed from the spring, a novice approached him near the temple gate. "There is a traveler below," the novice said. "He collapsed on the road. He is weak." The monk followed the novice down the lower path. They found the traveler resting against a tree, his breathing shallow, his face pale. Water was brought. The monk knelt and offered it slowly. As the traveler drank, color returned to his cheeks. "I did not expect help here," the traveler said softly. "I took the wrong path." The monk remembered the spilled water, the softened earth, the green shoots. That night, rain returned, gentle, persistent. The monk lay awake listening as drops struck the temple roof, each sound separate, yet part of a single movement. In the darkness, understanding did not arrive as a thought. It arrived as a feeling, subtle, spacious. Some reasons did not announce themselves. They revealed their presence only through what they quietly allowed to grow. The monk slept. Above him, clouds thinned. Stars emerged one by one, indifferent to explanation. The river flowed on. The rain ended before morning, leaving the mountain washed and quiet. When dawn arrived, it did not announce itself with color, but with clarity. Mist loosened its hold on the slopes, and the air felt lighter, as though something unseen had passed through during the night. The monk rose as he always did, moving without hurry. The wooden floor was cool beneath his feet, familiar and steady. Outside, droplets clung to pine needles, trembling slightly before falling one by one to the ground below. No instruction was given that morning. No task was assigned. The teacher remained in the courtyard, seated beside a small brazier, watching thin threads of smoke rise and dissolve into the air. The monk bowed and waited. Silence stretched, not empty, but full, filled with birdsong, distant water, and the soft creak of wood as the temple slowly warmed. At last, the teacher stood. "Today," he said, "the monk will walk the lower road." The lower road was rarely used. It curved away from the mountain, passing through fields and forest, before reaching the edge of the village and continuing beyond. It was a path of departure, not arrival. The monk took his staff and began. As the road descended, the land opened. Trees stood farther apart. Light filtered freely, touching grass, stone, and water without obstruction. The monk noticed how different this path felt beneath his feet. The ground was firm, shaped by carts and travelers rather than rain and roots. Movement required less attention, yet invited reflection. Along the way, signs of life appeared quietly. A bird's nest tucked beneath an eave. Footprints half erased by dust. A piece of cloth caught on a branch, faded by sun and wind. Near midday, the monk encountered an old man seated beside the road. His hands rested on his knees, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. "Is something wrong?" the monk asked gently. The old man shook his head. "Something has ended," he said. "The harvest was poor. The land did not respond." The monk sat beside him. Neither spoke for a time. Wind moved through tall grass, bending it in waves that traveled without sound. "The land owes nothing," the monk said at last. The old man smiled faintly. "I know," he replied, "but knowing does not always soften the heart." The monk stood and bowed. As he walked on, the teacher's words from earlier days returned without effort. Some paths were not meant to reward effort. Some seasons did not respond to care. And still, the river flowed. Further along the road, the monk passed a group of children chasing one another between trees. Their laughter rose and fell, bright and unburdened. One tripped and fell, scraping a knee. Tears came quickly. Before the monk could step forward, another child knelt, offering a leaf to wipe the blood. The crying slowed. The monk continued. By late afternoon, clouds gathered again, not heavy, but expectant. The air thickened, holding warmth and scent. The monk turned back toward the temple. As he climbed, the sound of the river grew louder, its voice steady and unchanged. Near the bend where the water had spilled days earlier, the monk stopped. The shoots had grown, small but unmistakable. They leaned slightly toward the light, fragile yet persistent. The monk did not touch them. He continued upward. At the temple, the teacher waited beneath the cedar tree. "You walked far," the teacher said. "Yes," the monk replied. "What did the road give?" The monk considered. "It gave no answers," he said, "but it did not withhold meaning." The teacher nodded. "That is enough." That night, the monk dreamed of water moving through unseen channels beneath the earth, feeding roots far from the river's edge. When morning came, the dream faded. The feeling remained. Some forces shaped the world without ever rising to the surface. Some reasons moved quietly, content to remain unnamed. The monk rose with this understanding resting lightly within him, not as certainty, as space. The morning arrived with a subtle shift in the air, not colder, not warmer, only different, as though the mountain had turned slightly in its sleep. Clouds drifted higher than before, thinning into long, pale strands that moved without urgency. The river reflected them briefly, then let them go. The monk stood at the temple steps, breathing in the quiet. Nothing pressed upon the moment. Nothing asked to be resolved. After the morning bell, the teacher gestured toward the storeroom. Inside, jars of grain lined the walls, each marked with careful script. Some were full, some nearly empty. "The monk will tend the lower fields today," the teacher said. The fields lay beyond the village, where the land flattened and widened, where soil met sky without interruption. They were not rich fields. They had never been. The monk walked slowly, staff tapping the earth with a steady rhythm. As he reached the fields, he noticed the ground was cracked in places, dry despite the recent rain. Seeds had been planted weeks earlier, yet little had emerged. An elder knelt near the edge of the field, pressing soil between his fingers. "The rain came late," the elder said without looking up, "and not enough." The monk knelt beside him. Together, they examined the ground. "We worked carefully," the elder continued. "We followed the seasons. Still, the land remained silent." Silence stretched between them, filled only by wind brushing against the grass. "The land does not answer on command," the monk said quietly. The elder nodded. "It never has," he replied, "but hope often forgets." They stood. The monk walked the length of the field, observing without judgment. In some places nothing stirred. In others, faint green pressed upward, barely visible. He did not linger. As the sun climbed, the air grew warmer. Insects hummed softly, weaving unseen paths above the earth. By midday, clouds gathered once more, heavier now, darkening at their edges. The monk turned back toward the temple as the first drops fell. Rain returned, steady and patient. From beneath the eaves, the monk watched water soak into the dry soil, filling cracks, darkening the ground inch by inch. It did not rush. It did not ask permission. That evening, the teacher joined him. "The rain comes when it comes," the teacher said, "not when it is called." The monk listened as water moved across stone, earth, and leaf, each surface receiving it differently. Later that night, as the rain softened into mist, the monk dreamed again. This time, he dreamed of seeds buried deep, unseen even by those who planted them. They waited without thought, without doubt, without hope. Waiting was not effort. It was alignment. When morning came, the rain had passed. The fields glistened. Days followed. The monk returned to the lower fields again and again, sometimes alone, sometimes beside others who worked in quiet companionship. Nothing changed at first. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the ground responded. Small shoots appeared where none had been before, sparse, uneven, but alive. The elder noticed. A smile crossed his face, not wide, but real. "It is not much," he said. "It is enough," the monk replied. As the monk walked back toward the temple, the river shimmered in afternoon light, carrying reflections that broke apart and reformed with every movement. The monk felt no urge to name what had happened. The season had not reversed. Loss had not vanished. And yet, something had shifted, not in the land, in the way waiting was understood. That night, the monk slept deeply. Above the mountain, stars moved along their ancient paths, unconcerned with fields, rain, or reason. Still, everything continued exactly as it needed to. The morning bell rang later than usual, not because the keepers slept, but because the air itself seemed to hesitate. Fog rested low in the valley, thick enough to soften edges, thin enough to allow light to pass through without revealing its source. The monk woke with a sense of quiet alertness, as though something subtle had shifted during the night and was still settling into place. Outside, the temple grounds were hushed. Footsteps sounded distant, even when nearby. Voices carried only halfway before dissolving. After the morning meal, the teacher called the monk to the back hall. The hall was rarely used. It faced the mountain rather than the river, its windows narrow and high, letting in light without offering view. The teacher sat on a simple mat, a folded cloth resting in his lap. "Today," the teacher said, "the monk will listen." No further instruction followed. They sat facing one another. At first, nothing presented itself. The monk noticed the texture of the floor, the faint sound of wind pressing against the outer wall, the subtle rise and fall of breath. Minutes passed. Then the teacher spoke again. "Long ago," he said, "this hall was built by hands that no longer exist. The wood was cut from trees that no longer stand. The stone was carried from a place no one remembers." The monk listened. "And yet," the teacher continued, "the hall remains." Silence returned. The teacher unfolded the cloth in his lap. Inside lay a thin cord, frayed at one end, knotted carefully along its length. "This cord once held a bell," the teacher said. "When the bell cracked, the cord was kept." He placed it between them. "Why?" the monk asked. "Because it had already learned how to hold weight," the teacher replied. The monk looked at the cord. It was unremarkable, worn smooth in places, rough in others. "Everything that carries weight is changed by it," the teacher said. "Not always visibly." The monk remained still. "You have carried questions," the teacher continued, not loudly, not with resistance. Still, they have shaped the way attention moves. The monk felt no discomfort at the words, only recognition. "Some questions are meant to be carried," the teacher said. "Others are meant to be set down." He slid the cord slightly closer. The monk did not reach for it. Outside, a faint sound emerged, not wind, not water. Footsteps. A novice appeared at the hall entrance, bowing quickly. "Master," the novice said. "A message has arrived from the village." The teacher nodded. They rose and stepped outside. Fog had begun to lift. Shapes emerged gradually. Rooftops, trees, distant hills. The messenger waited near the gate, breathing hard. "The bridge has given way," he said. "The old one near the fields. No one was hurt, but the crossing is gone." The teacher listened without reaction. "When?" he asked. "During the night," the messenger replied. "After the rain." The teacher nodded once. "The monk will walk there," he said. The monk bowed and took the lower path. As he descended, the fog thinned further, revealing the river below, wider here, slower, its surface broken by stones long settled into place. The bridge had been old, built when the river was narrower, when its course had not yet shifted. Now, wooden beams lay twisted at the bank, half submerged, half exposed. Villagers stood nearby, speaking quietly. "It held for years," one said. "Why now?" Another shook his head. The rain was not strong. The monk approached the edge and knelt, examining the broken supports. The wood was darkened, soft in places, hollow where water had worked patiently over time. A child stood nearby, staring at the river. "How will people cross?" the child asked. The monk did not answer immediately. Downstream, stones rose just above the water's surface, spaced irregularly, but close enough to form a natural path when the water was low. The monk pointed. "Carefully," he said. Over the next hours, planks were moved, ropes were tied. A temporary crossing emerged, slower, less certain, but possible. As the work finished, the child crossed first, testing each step with deliberate care. The monk watched. That evening, as the monk returned to the temple, the teacher waited by the river. "The bridge failed," the teacher said. "Yes," the monk replied. "Was it sudden?" "No," the teacher nodded. "Most endings are not," he said. They stood together as the river moved past, unchanged by words or loss. The monk thought of the cord, of weight carried quietly over time, of questions that had shaped attention without demanding answers. Some structures existed to be replaced, some beliefs existed to be loosened. That night, the monk returned to the hall alone. He sat where the teacher had sat earlier. The cord still lay there. This time, the monk picked it up. It felt lighter than expected. He placed it beside him and closed his eyes. Nothing resolved. Nothing needed to. Outside, the river continued its slow, faithful movement, carrying with it the traces of bridges, rain, and reasons that did not ask to be named. Morning came gradually, as if the mountain were careful not to disturb itself. Light filtered through thinning mist, revealing outlines before details, movement before form. The temple appeared first as shadow, then as structure, then as presence. The monk woke with no sense of urgency. Breath moved easily. The body felt rested, though nothing in particular had changed. Outside, the river carried fragments of the broken bridge downstream. Wood touched water, turned slowly, and disappeared around the bend without resistance. After the morning bell, the teacher did not speak. He walked instead, staff tapping softly against stone, heading toward the lower path. The monk followed. They passed the place where the water had spilled days earlier. The shoots had grown stronger. Their green was deeper now, their stems less tentative. The teacher paused, observing them without comment. Farther down, the air grew warmer. The village appeared gradually, sounds rising before shapes. A door closing, a voice calling, the low rhythm of daily life. At the edge of the village, people gathered near the river. not in alarm, in attention. The absence of the bridge had changed movement. Paths adjusted, voices slowed. Where people once crossed without thought, they now paused. They looked at the water, they looked at one another. A woman waited with a basket at the river's edge. An older man stepped ahead, testing the stones before her. A child followed, counting each step aloud. The crossing took longer. No one complained. The monk watched. Near the bank, the traveler who had collapsed days earlier stood speaking with a villager. Strength had returned to his posture. His voice carried more weight now. "I will stay a while," he said. "The road beyond can wait." The monk felt something loosen again, not in the mind, but deeper, where holding had once been subtle and constant. They continued walking. Beyond the village, the road curved into open land, where fields stretched unevenly toward the horizon. The ground bore marks of effort, but not struggle. Here, the monk noticed something new. Where the bridge once directed all movement through a single narrow point, people now crossed at several places. Paths braided and separated. No single route dominated. The teacher stopped. "Notice," he said. The monk did. "Loss rearranges attention," the teacher continued. "What was once unseen becomes necessary." They turned back toward the temple as afternoon light softened. Along the way, clouds gathered again, not heavy, not threatening, only present. By the time they reached the lower slope, the sky darkened slightly. Wind moved through tall grass in slow waves. The monk felt no anticipation of rain, only awareness. At the bend near the river, a sound rose. Not water, not wind, crying. They followed the sound to a young boy seated on a rock near the bank. His shoulders shook, his hands were clenched. The teacher approached and knelt. "What has happened?" he asked. The boy did not answer at first. Then words spilled out unevenly. The stone moved. The water was faster today. The basket fell. He pointed downstream. "My mother needed that food." The teacher listened without interruption. The monk looked toward the river. The basket was already gone. The teacher stood. "The water did not take it," he said gently. "The water carried it." He turned to the monk. "Come." They walked downstream along the bank, moving slowly, scanning the water's edge. After some time, the basket appeared, lodged against reeds where the current slowed. The food inside was damp, but intact. The boy's breath caught as he ran forward. The monk helped lift the basket. Nothing was said. As they returned, the teacher placed a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. "Walk more slowly tomorrow," he said. "Not because the water is dangerous, but because it is alive." The boy nodded. Back at the temple, evening settled without ceremony. The monk sat alone beneath the cedar tree. He thought of bridges and baskets, of seeds and rain, of paths that widened when narrow ones disappeared. The phrase that had once pressed against his understanding returned again. Everything happens for a reason. It no longer sounded like comfort. It no longer sounded like explanation. It sounded like permission. Permission to stop forcing meaning. Permission to trust movement without knowing its destination. That night, the monk dreamed of a wide river with no bridges at all. People crossed where they could, helping one another without instruction. No one asked where the crossing began. No one asked where it ended. Morning came before the dream finished. The monk rose. The river was still there. So was the path. The morning unfolded without distinction. No bell marked its arrival. No sound announced its presence. Light simply found its way into the valley, touching surfaces one by one, without preference. The monk woke before thought formed. Breath moved freely, as if it had learned something during the night and wished to continue without interruption. Outside, the river moved at its familiar pace. Nothing suggested change, and yet the monk sensed it, not as expectation, but as openness. After the morning meal, the teacher did not assign a task. He walked instead toward the rear garden, where stones were arranged without pattern, and moss filled the spaces between them. The monk followed. They sat. Time passed in a way that could not be counted. A leaf fell from a branch overhead. It landed soundlessly on the moss, disturbing nothing. The teacher spoke quietly. "Most people notice events," he said. "They mark beginnings and endings. They wait for meaning to arrive, wearing clear shape." The monk listened. "But life," the teacher continued, "moves mostly in what lies between." Silence returned. The monk became aware of subtle things, the slight warmth of sunlight against his sleeve, the way shadows shifted without moving, the distant sound of village life carried faintly upward, then dissolved. "When something breaks," the teacher said, "attention sharpens. When something is lost, thought gathers around it." The monk recalled the bridge, the basket, the water. "But what happens," the teacher asked, "after attention fades?" The monk did not answer. They remained seated. Later that day, the monk was asked to assist in the kitchen. The work was simple: chopping vegetables, carrying water, stirring grain. Nothing required explanation. A novice nearby dropped a bowl. It cracked along the rim, not enough to shatter, enough to change how it would be used. The novice froze, eyes wide. The monk knelt, examining the crack. "It still holds," he said. The novice exhaled. The bowl was placed aside, no longer for soup, now for dry grain. That evening, the monk walked alone to the river. The water was lower than before. Stones once hidden now revealed their smooth surfaces. A heron stood nearby, perfectly still, watching. The monk sat on a flat rock and listened. Thoughts came and went without insistence. A memory surfaced, not of pain, not of joy, but of the time before the question had formed it all, before the phrase had been spoken. Everything happens for a reason. The monk realized that the phrase itself had never been the burden. The burden had been the need to translate life into something explainable. The river offered no explanation. It offered movement. As dusk settled, the teacher appeared, stopping a short distance away. "Does the river know where it is going?" the teacher asked. "No," the monk replied. "Does it arrive?" "Yes," the teacher nodded. "Arrival is not the same as intention." They stood together as night approached. Lanterns glowed faintly in the distance. Stars emerged one by one, unconcerned with what had passed or what might come. The monk felt no answer rise, and for the first time, that absence felt complete. The night passed without distinction, not as rest, not as waiting, simply as time moving without concern for being noticed. Before dawn, the monk woke to the sound of the river changing its tone. Not louder, not softer, only different. As if the water had shifted its attention slightly, flowing around something new beneath the surface. He rose and stepped outside. The sky was still dark, yet no longer heavy. Stars faded gradually, not all at once, yielding space to a pale, undefined light. The river reflected nothing clearly. Its surface moved in quiet fragments, carrying shadow more than image. The monk stood without intention. There was no task waiting, no instruction given the day before, no expectation forming. When the bell rang, it felt distant, as though it belonged to another rhythm entirely. After the morning meal, the teacher did not appear. The monk waited. Time passed. Eventually, the monk walked alone toward the river path, not because he was sent, but because his feet remembered the way. Along the bank, the air was cool and open. Grass bent slightly under the weight of moisture. Insects moved low, close to the ground, following patterns too small to be followed. The monk noticed how often movement happened without signal. A leaf detached and fell. A stone loosened and rolled. Water shifted its path around both without pause. Further downstream, the monk encountered an unfamiliar sight. A section of the riverbank had collapsed slightly during the night. Not dramatically, not violently. The earth had simply released itself. Where once the bank rose firm and narrow, now it sloped gently into the water, forming a shallow edge. The monk knelt and examined it. The soil was dark and cool, holding the shape of fingers when pressed. Roots were exposed, some broken, some still gripping. The monk did not attempt to repair it. He sat. Hours seemed to pass, though no measure was kept. At some point, villagers arrived, not in alarm, but curiosity. "This will change the crossing," one said. "Yes," another replied, "but perhaps it will make it easier." A child stepped into the shallow edge, water reaching only the ankle. The child laughed softly, surprised. No one argued. Someone placed a stone to mark the edge. Another moved it slightly. The crossing adjusted. The monk watched. No instruction was required. By midday, the sun had risen fully. Light struck the water at an angle, breaking into fragments that danced and disappeared. The monk returned toward the temple. Halfway up the path, the teacher appeared, not as if he had arrived, but as if he had always been there. They walked together without speaking. At the place where water had spilled weeks earlier, the shoots were no longer fragile. They stood firm now, small leaves spreading outward, catching light without effort. The teacher paused. "Nothing asked for this," he said. The monk understood. They continued. In the courtyard, a novice approached with hesitation. "Master," the novice said, "someone in the village asks why the bridge broke now and not before. They want to know what caused it." The teacher considered this. Then he looked at the monk. "Tell them," he said, "that the bridge did not break now. It was breaking for a long time." The novice bowed and left. That afternoon, the monk was assigned to copy old texts. The work was slow. Ink met paper patiently. Each character required attention, not speed. Some strokes bled slightly into the fiber. Others held their shape perfectly. The monk did not correct them. As evening approached, clouds gathered again, higher this time, thin and elongated. The monk set down the brush. Outside, the wind carried distant sounds, voices, tools, movement, all continuing without reference to him. He walked once more to the river. The shallow edge formed by the collapsed bank was already worn smooth by passing feet. Paths adapted quickly when no one insisted they remain unchanged. The monk stood still, feeling something settle. Not insight, not understanding. Release. The question that once followed him like a shadow did not return, not because it had been answered, but because nothing remained that required it. The phrase, "everything happens for a reason," passed through awareness once more. This time it did not pause. It moved through like water through open hands. Night arrived slowly. Lanterns glowed. The river darkened. Stars reappeared. The monk returned to the temple and slept without dreaming. No meaning gathered during the night, and none was needed. Morning did not arrive as a beginning. It arrived as continuation. Light seeped gently into the valley, touching stone, leaf, and water without favor. Nothing marked the moment when night became day. There was no clear edge between them. The monk woke with the sound of the river already present in awareness, as though it had been there even before his sleep had loosened its hold. Breath moved quietly. The body felt neither heavy nor light. Outside, the air carried the scent of damp earth and old wood. Mist lingered low, not obscuring, only softening. The monk stepped into the courtyard. No one else was there. The bell had not yet been rung, but the monk did not wait for it. He sat on the stone bench near the cedar tree, hands resting loosely, eyes open. Time moved. A bird landed briefly on the temple roof, then lifted away. Somewhere, a door opened and closed. Eventually, the bell rang. Its sound did not travel far. It did not need to. After the morning meal, the teacher did not assign a task. He walked instead toward the far edge of the temple grounds, where the land sloped gently downward and the river could be seen through breaks in the trees. The monk followed. They stopped where the ground flattened, where the temple ended and the path began without ceremony. "Sit," the teacher said. They sat. The river moved below, its surface broken by stones that had been there longer than memory allowed. Water curved around them patiently, reshaping nothing, wearing nothing away in haste. The teacher spoke softly. "Many come here believing they must understand life before they can rest within it." The monk listened. "They think peace waits at the end of explanation," the teacher continued. "That clarity comes when all reasons are uncovered and arranged." Silence returned. A breeze moved through tall grass, bending it without resistance. "The river does not pause to explain why it flows," the teacher said, "and yet it arrives everywhere it needs to be." The monk felt no response form. Words did not gather. "That is not ignorance," the teacher added. "It is trust without demand." They remained seated. Hours passed unnoticed. At some point, a group of villagers crossed the river below, moving carefully along stones and shallow edges that had formed naturally over time. They spoke quietly, helping one another without instruction. The monk watched. No one mentioned the bridge. In the afternoon, clouds passed overhead, casting brief shadows that moved across the land and vanished. The monk noticed how quickly the mind released them. Nothing lingered. Later, back at the temple, the monk assisted in small tasks, sweeping leaves, carrying water, arranging bowls. Each movement felt complete. A novice approached hesitantly. "Will the bridge be rebuilt?" the novice asked. The monk paused, then answered. "Perhaps," he said, "and perhaps not." The novice frowned slightly. "But how will people cross?" "They are crossing," the monk replied. The novice considered this, then bowed and left. As evening approached, the teacher and the monk walked once more toward the river. The shallow crossing had changed again. Stones had shifted. Water had risen slightly. Movement adapted. No plan guided it. The teacher stopped. "Look," he said. The monk did. "Nothing here asks to be permanent," the teacher continued, "and yet nothing is incomplete." The monk felt this not as realization, but as familiarity. Night came slowly. Lanterns were lit. Their reflections wavered on the river's surface, stretching and breaking with each ripple. The monk stood quietly at the bank. There was no thought of why things had happened, no search for patterns. Only this: water moving, light flickering, breath continuing. The phrase that once shaped the monk's path did not return. It had loosened its grip so completely that it no longer needed to be released. Everything happened. That was enough. The monk returned to the temple and slept. No dreams followed, only the steady presence of the river, moving without explanation, carrying the night forward as it always had. The night loosened its hold slowly, without resistance. Darkness thinned at the edges, retreating not as something defeated, but as something complete. The monk woke before the bell, before thought gathered shape. Breath moved gently, unclaimed by intention. The body rested within itself, neither waiting nor preparing. Outside, the temple grounds were still, not silent, alive in their own restrained way. A branch shifted, water moved over stone. Somewhere, a bird tested the morning air with a single call, then fell quiet again. The monk rose and stepped outside. The sky was pale, holding no color yet, only depth. Mist hovered close to the ground, clinging to grass and stone, blurring distance until the valley seemed to exist only where the monk stood. He walked without destination, following the curve of the path that traced the edge of the temple grounds. No task had been given, no expectation remained. The bell rang behind him, low and steady. Its sound followed him briefly, then dissolved. Near the cedar tree, the teacher sat alone, not waiting, not watching, simply there. The monk bowed and sat nearby. Neither spoke. Time moved, unnoticed. The monk became aware of how little effort was required to remain present, not focused, not vigilant, just present. A thought drifted through awareness, not insistent, not charged. It passed. The teacher stirred slightly, adjusting his posture. "When teaching is no longer needed," he said quietly, "companionship remains." The monk listened. "Not teacher and student," the teacher continued, "not guide and follower." Silence followed. "Just two people sitting beside the river," the teacher said. They remained. Later, the monk walked toward the river alone. The water was lower again. Stones that had been submerged now rested exposed, drying in the early light. A fisherman stood near the shallow edge, line resting slack in the water. They exchanged no words. The fisherman adjusted his footing, then waited. Nothing was forced. Further downstream, reeds swayed gently, brushing against one another with a soft, irregular sound. The monk sat on a familiar rock. There was no reflection, no recollection, only this moment, unremarkable and whole. At midday, clouds passed overhead, thin and distant. Their shadows moved across the land like breath across skin. The monk returned to the temple. Inside, the halls felt different now, not changed, revealed. Walls no longer seemed to contain space. They simply marked it. The monk assisted in small tasks alongside others. No one spoke much. There was ease in shared silence. A novice dropped a handful of grain. Another knelt to gather it without comment. The monk noticed how movement completed itself without instruction. Later, in the back hall, the monk paused. The cord still lay where it had been left days before. He picked it up briefly, feeling its worn surface, then placed it back. No meaning rose from the gesture. It did not need to. As evening approached, the teacher and the monk walked together one last time toward the river. They did not speak. At the water's edge, the teacher stopped. "This is where I sit," he said simply. The monk nodded. They stood side by side, watching light fade. The river reflected nothing clearly now. Its surface darkened, absorbing the sky rather than mirroring it. The teacher breathed slowly. "So much effort is spent trying to understand," he said quietly, as if life were withholding something. The monk felt no response arise. "When nothing is withheld," the teacher continued, "nothing needs to be taken." Silence returned. Night gathered gently around them. Lanterns glowed faintly in the distance, their light trembling on the water before dissolving. The teacher turned and walked back toward the temple. The monk remained. The river continued. There was no sense of being left behind, only the presence of water, stone, air, and breath, moving together without hierarchy. Eventually, the monk returned as well. Sleep came naturally, without seeking. No dreams visited, only the quiet companionship of the night, resting beside the river, moving on without need for witness. The night did not end. It simply thinned. Darkness loosened around the edges of the valley, releasing shapes slowly, as though the world preferred not to be named too quickly. The river moved beneath it all, unchanged, unconcerned with light or shadow. The monk slept lightly, not because sleep was shallow, but because nothing pressed upon it. Dreams did not form, thoughts did not gather. When waking came, it felt less like rising and more like continuing. Outside, the air was cool and clear. Mist hovered close to the ground, not hiding anything, only softening the distance between things. The monk stepped into the courtyard. No bell had rung yet. No sound asked for attention. A leaf rested on the stone path where it had fallen during the night. No foot disturbed it. The monk did not sit immediately. He walked slowly, without destination, tracing the perimeter of the temple grounds as he had done many times before. Each step landed fully. Each breath completed itself. There was no sense of walking toward something. At the edge of the grounds, where the land sloped gently downward, the monk paused. Below, the river lay open and wide. Its surface reflected nothing clearly, absorbing light rather than returning it. The teacher was already there, not seated, not standing, simply present, leaning lightly on his staff, eyes resting on the water. The monk approached and bowed. The teacher nodded once. They stood together. No instruction followed. No words were offered. Time passed in a way that could not be measured. The monk noticed how awareness no longer moved outward toward things. It rested where it was. Sounds arrived and departed without echo. Sensation appeared without interpretation. A bird crossed the sky. Its shadow passed over the water and vanished. The teacher spoke quietly, almost as if speaking to the river itself. "When people first come here," he said, "they believe silence is something to achieve." The monk listened. "They think it waits beyond noise, beyond thought, beyond effort." The teacher shifted his weight slightly. "But silence," he continued, "is not absence. It is what remains when nothing is being resisted." The monk felt no response rise. There was nothing to add. They stood until the light strengthened, until mist retreated toward the trees, until the valley revealed itself without ceremony. Later, back at the temple, the monk moved through small tasks, sweeping leaves, arranging bowls, carrying water. Each action ended where it began without residue. A novice passed by, then another. No one spoke. The temple felt wide. At midday, the monk returned to the river alone. The shallow crossing had changed again. Stones had shifted subtly, their surfaces smoother now, shaped by passing feet and flowing water. A woman crossed slowly, basket balanced carefully. She did not hurry. Halfway across, she paused, adjusting her footing. The monk watched. No concern arose. No anticipation followed. She reached the other side and continued on. The monk sat on the familiar rock. For a long time, nothing moved in awareness except the river itself. Then, quietly, a memory surfaced. Not vivid, not emotional. The first time the phrase had been heard, "Everything happens for a reason," it drifted through awareness like a leaf on water. No meaning attached to it. No resistance followed. The phrase dissolved. The monk noticed that even the need for trust had faded. Trust implied uncertainty. What remained did not require it. In the late afternoon, clouds gathered briefly, then dispersed without rain. Light shifted. The monk returned to the temple. The teacher was seated in the back hall. The cord lay between them still. The monk sat across from the teacher. The teacher did not speak. Eventually, the monk picked up the cord and placed it gently back into the folded cloth. The teacher nodded. Nothing else was done. As evening approached, the temple prepared itself quietly. Lanterns were lit. Doors were closed. The river darkened. The monk walked one final time to the water's edge. Stars began to appear, faint at first, then steady. Their reflections broke apart on the river's surface, never forming a complete image. The monk felt no sense of ending, only deepening. When sleep came, it arrived without invitation. The body rested, breath moved. Outside, the river continued carrying light, shadow, and sound without preference. And even silence, it seemed, had found a place to rest. Morning unfolded as it always had, though the sense of always no longer carried weight. Light appeared gradually, touching the valley without emphasis, revealing nothing new and nothing repeated. The monk woke before the bell, not from habit, but because waking and sleeping had begun to feel less like opposites and more like neighboring rooms. Breath moved. The body rested within the movement. Outside, the courtyard held a stillness that was not waiting. Stone, wood, and air shared the same unhurried presence. The monk stepped out and paused. No direction presented itself. He walked anyway. The path along the temple wall curved gently, following a shape chosen long ago for reasons no one remembered. Moss softened its edges. Footsteps left no trace. The river could be heard before it was seen. Its sound no longer suggested motion or distance. It simply existed, like breath, like time. At the bank, the monk stopped. The water was calm, though never still. Its surface accepted the sky without holding it. The teacher was not there. This absence carried no meaning. The monk sat on the flat stone and watched. Moments passed without accumulation. A ripple spread outward, where something unseen touched the surface, then faded. A cloud moved overhead, casting a shadow that dissolved before it could be named. The monk noticed how little effort it took to remain present when nothing was being held. Later, the monk returned to the temple. Inside, the halls felt open, as if walls had grown transparent to awareness. Not physically, experientially. A novice crossed the hall carrying bowls. Another followed, steps light, eyes lowered. No words were exchanged. The monk assisted quietly, moving where movement was needed, stopping where stopping was natural. At midday, the bell rang once. Its sound did not interrupt anything. It simply passed through. The monk ate slowly, tasting without analysis. Grain, water, warmth. Each sensation arrived fully, then departed. In the afternoon, the monk walked toward the lower path. The village moved gently, without urgency. Children played near the river's edge, their voices soft, unforced. An elder repaired a tool beneath a tree, movements deliberate, unhurried. The shallow crossing had become familiar now. People stepped onto it naturally, no longer thinking of what had once been there. A traveler paused near the bank, looking uncertain. The monk approached. "Is this the way across?" the traveler asked. "Yes," the monk replied. "But there is no bridge," the traveler said. The monk smiled faintly. "There is a crossing." The traveler hesitated, then nodded and stepped forward carefully. Nothing more was said. The monk continued along the path beyond the village, where fields stretched unevenly and the land opened outward. Wind moved freely here, uncontained. The monk stood still, feeling it pass through robes, through breath, through awareness. Nothing resisted. As evening approached, the monk returned. The teacher sat beneath the cedar tree, eyes half closed, staff resting lightly against his shoulder. The monk bowed and sat nearby. No words were exchanged. The presence between them required no form. Time passed. Eventually the teacher spoke, softly enough that the words seemed to rise from the air itself. "When understanding is complete," he said, "it becomes unnecessary." The monk felt no response form, no agreement, no question, only recognition without edge. The teacher stood and walked away slowly, without looking back. The monk remained. The river continued. Night approached without ceremony. Lanterns glowed faintly in the distance. Stars appeared one by one, their light reaching the valley after long journeys that required no witness. The monk returned to the temple and rested. Sleep arrived like a familiar friend who did not need to be greeted. Outside, the river moved on, carrying nothing, lacking nothing, needing no name. The morning revealed itself without effort. Light entered the valley as it always had, not as a rival, but as continuation. The monk woke to the sound of wind moving through bamboo. The sound did not call attention to itself. It moved, then did not. Breath followed its own rhythm. The body rested inside it. Outside, the temple grounds were already awake, not with activity, but with presence. Stone held coolness. Wood held warmth. Air held everything lightly. The monk stepped into the courtyard. No bell had rung yet. No sound was required to mark the hour. He noticed how walking no longer felt like movement toward anything. Each step completed itself where it landed. Near the garden stones, dew clung briefly to moss, then released itself without trace. Nothing lingered. The monk walked toward the river. Along the way, he passed places that once carried meaning. The bend where water had spilled, the slope where roots showed through soil, the clearing where paths widened. They were simply places now. At the riverbank, the water moved steadily, carrying reflections that did not remain long enough to be examined. A heron stood nearby, motionless. The monk sat a short distance away. Neither acknowledged the other. Time passed. A fisherman arrived later, casting a line gently into the water. He waited without expectation, hands resting loosely. The line moved slightly with the current. Nothing pulled. The fisherman adjusted his stance and continued waiting. The monk observed without forming thought. Eventually, the fisherman gathered his line and left. No fish followed. No disappointment arose. The river remained. At midday, the monk returned to the temple. Inside, activity moved quietly. A novice swept the hall. Another arranged bowls near the kitchen door. Their movements were unremarkable, complete. The monk joined without instruction, lifting a basket, setting it down, adjusting its position slightly. No one spoke. The bell rang once. The sound did not divide time. It moved through it. After the meal, the teacher did not appear. This absence was not noticed until it was. The monk felt no concern. In the afternoon, clouds passed overhead, thin and pale, their shadows brushing the land without pause. The monk walked the lower road alone. In the village, life continued without reference to the temple. A woman folded cloth outside her door. A child traced patterns in dust with a stick. The shallow crossing held. People crossed slowly, attentively. The monk stood aside, watching. Nothing needed to be corrected. Beyond the village, the road stretched open, bordered by grass that bent gently under the breeze. The monk stopped and stood there for some time. The sky felt wide. There was no sense of separation between standing and being. As evening approached, the monk returned. The teacher sat beneath the cedar tree. They exchanged a glance, nothing more. They sat together. No teaching followed. No silence was emphasized. The river moved. Lanterns were lit as darkness gathered. The monk noticed how night no longer felt like an ending. It settled the way breath settles after effort, naturally. Later, lying in his chamber, the monk listened to distant sounds fade. A door closed. Footsteps softened. The valley rested. Sleep came without invitation. No dream formed. Outside, the river continued its quiet work, shaping nothing in particular, arriving everywhere it needed to be. The night released itself slowly, not because it was finished, but because it no longer needed to hold. Darkness thinned into a pale openness, and the valley accepted the change without comment. The monk woke before the bell, before the idea of morning had fully formed. Breath moved evenly, without effort or guidance. The body rested within that movement, complete where it was. Outside, the temple grounds held a gentle stillness, not the stillness of waiting, but the stillness of something that had already arrived. The monk stepped into the courtyard. Stone paths lay quiet beneath his feet. Moss held its place between them, untroubled by the passing of time. He walked toward the edge of the grounds, where the path once felt distinct. Now, it seemed to blur, not physically, but in the way it was perceived. The difference between path and ground had softened. At the slope above the river, the monk stopped. Below, water moved steadily, tracing a course that required no decision. Stones guided it without directing. Banks shaped it without containing. The monk stood without intention. There was no sense of standing here rather than there. A breeze passed through, lifting the hem of his robe briefly before settling again. It left no trace. After the bell rang, the monk did not move immediately. The sound passed through awareness like everything else. Present, then gone. Later, he joined the quiet flow of temple life. A basket was carried, a door was opened, a bowl was placed, then moved slightly to the left. Nothing was planned. Nothing was accidental. At midday, the monk walked the lower road once more. The village appeared as it always had, though the sense of appearing had faded. It simply was. Children moved near the river, their voices light, unburdened. An elder rested beneath a tree, eyes half closed. The shallow crossing had become part of the landscape. People stepped onto it without hesitation. No one remembered when it had not been there. The monk crossed as well. Water touched stone. Stone held weight. Movement completed itself. Beyond the village, the road opened into wide land. Here, the monk paused. Wind moved freely, carrying scent and sound without distinction. There was no urge to continue, no urge to turn back. Standing was enough. As afternoon light softened, the monk returned toward the temple. The teacher was seated beneath the cedar tree, staff resting beside him. The monk bowed. The teacher nodded. They sat. For a long time, nothing passed between them. Then the teacher spoke softly. "When the path softens," he said, "it no longer tells you where to go." The monk listened. "You discover," the teacher continued, "that you have been walking with the ground all along." Silence returned. The monk felt no response rise. There was nothing to respond to. Evening settled without ceremony. Lanterns glowed. Shadows lengthened, then dissolved. The monk walked alone to the river one final time that day. The water reflected faint starlight, breaking it into pieces that did not remain. He watched, without following. The phrase that once shaped his journey did not return, not because it was forgotten, but because nothing remained that needed to be framed by words. When sleep came, it arrived gently, like a door left open rather than closed. Outside, the river continued, not forward, not onward, simply continuing. The night did not lift. It softened. Darkness loosened its edges, not retreating, not advancing, simply becoming less distinct. The valley rested inside this gentler shade, as though the difference between night and morning no longer needed to be clearly drawn. The monk woke without transition. Sleep released him the way water releases a stone, without resistance, without sound. Breath moved. The body was present without commentary. Outside, the temple grounds felt unchanged, yet the sense of unchanged no longer mattered. Stone and wood held their places without effort. Air moved freely among them. The monk stepped into the courtyard. No bell had rung. No sound was missing. He noticed how little remained to be done, not because tasks were finished, but because doing had lost its urgency. Walking happened. Stopping happened. Neither required explanation. The monk moved toward the slope, overlooking the river. From here, the water appeared wide and slow, its surface broken only by stones that no longer felt like obstacles. The monk stood. There was no thought of standing here instead of there. Location had thinned into presence. Below, a few villagers crossed at the shallow place, their movements calm, familiar. No one hurried. No one waited. The crossing no longer felt like a solution. It felt like part of the river. The monk descended slowly and sat near the water. A current brushed against a stone and curved around it without interruption. The monk watched without attention fixing itself. Time moved without collecting. At some point, the teacher arrived and stood nearby. Neither acknowledged the other. They sat. The teacher spoke once quietly. "Even flowing ends," he said, "not as stopping, as resting." The monk felt no response rise. The words did not settle anywhere. They passed through like breath. Silence returned. Later, the monk rose and walked back toward the temple. The path felt wide now, not because it had changed, but because nothing narrowed it. In the back hall, the monk paused. The cord lay where it always had. He picked it up, feeling its familiar texture, then set it down again. This time, there was no sense of setting down, only movement completing itself. The afternoon passed gently. Clouds drifted overhead, thin and slow. Their shadows touched the ground briefly, then moved on. The monk assisted in small tasks without thought of assistance. A bowl was placed. A door was closed. No moment asked to be remembered. As evening approached, the teacher and the monk stood together once more near the river. The water reflected little now. Light had faded into softness. "There is nothing left to follow," the teacher said quietly. The monk listened. "And nothing left to abandon," the teacher added. Silence. Night settled. Lanterns glowed faintly, their light barely touching the water before dissolving. The monk returned to his chamber. Sleep came easily, like an old habit that no longer required effort. No dream followed. Outside, the river continued, though even continuing had begun to lose meaning. Movement remained. Stillness remained. The difference between them grew thin. Morning arrived without arrival. Light appeared, but nothing seemed to receive it. The valley did not wake. It simply remained. The monk opened his eyes with no sense of beginning. Sleep had not ended. It had loosened. Breath continued without reference to waking or resting. Outside, the temple grounds were unchanged, and the idea of unchanged no longer carried meaning. Stone, wood, air, and space held one another quietly. The monk stepped into the courtyard. No bell had rung, no sound was absent. Walking happened without direction. The body moved where it moved. At the edge of the grounds, where the slope met the river's open view, the monk paused. Below, water moved gently, its surface neither calm nor restless. There was no sense of watching it. Seeing occurred. The river curved around stones that had long ceased to feel separate from it. Water and stone shared a rhythm older than naming. The monk stood. There was no sense of standing as someone, only the uprightness of the body within space. Later, the teacher appeared, not arriving, not leaving, simply present. They sat together near the river. No greeting was exchanged. Time passed without accumulation. A sound drifted, a bird lifting from reeds. A ripple spread and dissolved. The teacher spoke once, quietly. "At first," he said, "there is a watcher and what is watched." The monk listened. "Then," the teacher continued, "there is only watching." Silence followed. "And finally," the teacher said, "even that grows unnecessary." The monk felt no response arise. The words did not land. They did not need to. The teacher stood and walked away slowly, steps soft, unhurried. The monk remained. The river continued, but the sense of continuing was faint now, like a word remembered without its meaning. At midday, the monk moved through the temple halls. He passed novices, elders, walls, doors. Nothing stood apart. A bowl was lifted. It was set down. No one did it. It happened. In the afternoon, the monk walked the lower path. The village existed quietly. People moved. Animals rested. Tools lay where they lay. The shallow crossing held. Feet touched stone. Water flowed. No thought arose about before or after. Beyond the village, open land stretched outward. The monk stood there for some time. Wind passed through. It did not pass by. It passed through. As evening approached, the monk returned. The teacher was seated beneath the cedar tree, eyes closed. The monk sat nearby. Nothing passed between them, not even silence. Night gathered slowly. Lanterns glowed faintly, their light barely registering before dissolving. The monk did not rise to look at the river. The river did not need to be seen. Sleep came without being entered. Dreams did not form. Outside, water moved, stone rested, air passed, and the sense of someone observing it all softened further, not disappearing, only becoming unnecessary. The night did not give way to morning. Morning emerged gently from within it, as though light and darkness were no longer opposites, but different tones of the same silence. The monk opened his eyes without the sense of having awakened. Breath was already moving. The body was already here. There was no recollection of sleep ending, no anticipation of the day beginning. Outside, the temple grounds existed without invitation. Stone paths lay where they had always lain. Trees stood without holding their shape. Air moved without direction. The monk rose and stepped into the courtyard. No bell rang, no sound was missing. The absence of signal felt complete. Walking occurred. The body moved along the familiar edge of the grounds, though familiarity itself had faded. Nothing felt known. Nothing felt unknown. At the slope overlooking the river, the monk stopped. Below, water moved slowly, curving around stones that were no longer perceived as separate forms. The boundary between movement and stillness had thinned so completely that neither could be named with certainty. There was no sense of looking, seeing happened. The monk stood without identity, not as a monk, not as a watcher, only uprightness within open space. The teacher was not present. This absence carried no meaning. Time passed, though nothing measured it. At some point, footsteps sounded behind. The teacher stood nearby, leaning lightly on his staff. They did not sit. They did not acknowledge one another. The river continued. After a long while, the teacher spoke quietly. "Presence," he said, "is often mistaken for effort." The words did not seek understanding. They passed through the open space where thought once gathered. "When effort ends," the teacher continued, "presence no longer needs to appear." Silence followed. The monk felt nothing shift. Nothing needed to. The teacher turned and walked away slowly, steps dissolving into the landscape. The monk remained. Later, movement happened. The monk walked back toward the temple. Walls appeared. Doors appeared. They did not contain. Inside, the hall felt wide, not spacious, open. A novice passed, then another. No one noticed anyone else. Tasks unfolded naturally. A bowl was lifted. Water was poured. Grain was set aside. No action carried a sense of doing. At midday, the bell rang once. Its sound passed through everything equally, touching nothing, lingering nowhere. The monk ate. Taste appeared. It vanished. No preference formed. In the afternoon, the monk walked the lower road. The village moved quietly. People crossed the river without thinking of crossing. Children paused to watch light ripple across water, then ran on. No one remembered when the bridge had been. No one needed to. Beyond the village, open land stretched outward. The monk stood there. Wind moved through grass, not over it. The body felt the movement without interpretation. There was no longer a sense of standing as someone in the land, only land standing. As evening approached, the monk returned. The teacher sat beneath the cedar tree. They sat together. No words arose. Even silence felt unnecessary. Lanterns were lit. Their light appeared faintly, then dissolved into the dark. Night gathered without weight. The monk lay down. Sleep came without arrival. No dream formed. No observer remained to witness the absence of dreams. Outside, the river moved. Or perhaps it did not. The distinction no longer mattered. Presence had not disappeared. It had rested, like water, no longer shaped by its banks. Night and morning no longer exchanged places. They overlapped gently, as though time itself had forgotten where one ended and the other began. Light appeared without contrast. Darkness did not recede. The valley existed in a soft equilibrium, neither illuminated nor obscured. The monk opened his eyes. There was no sense of waking, no memory of sleeping. Breath moved, that was all. The body lay where it lay, not resting, not active, simply present. Outside, the temple grounds were unchanged in form, though form itself had thinned into suggestion. Stone paths did not lead anywhere. Walls did not enclose. Air moved freely through everything. The monk rose. Movement occurred without intention. There was no thought of stepping outside. Outside happened. The courtyard appeared, not as space, not as place, but as openness holding shape lightly. No bell rang, none was expected. Walking happened. The body traced familiar ground, though familiarity had dissolved. Nothing was remembered. Nothing was anticipated. At the edge of the slope, overlooking the river, the monk paused. Below, water moved, or perhaps the idea of movement lingered where movement once mattered. Stones did not interrupt it. Banks did not guide it. There was no watcher. Seeing happened without being owned. The monk stood. There was no sense of standing as someone. Uprightness occurred within space. Time did not pass. Moments did not gather. Eventually the teacher appeared, not arriving, not emerging, simply present, like the river. They did not sit. They did not speak. The teacher rested his staff against the ground. After a long while, he said quietly, "When even presence rests, nothing needs to remain." The words did not land. They did not pass. They dissolved as they arose. The teacher turned and walked away. No trace followed. The monk remained, or perhaps remaining was no longer accurate. Later, movement unfolded again. The monk walked, not back, not forward. The temple appeared. The halls felt neither large nor small. Novices moved quietly. Elders passed. No separation was sensed. A bowl was lifted. It was set down. Grain fell into it. Hands moved. No one acted. At midday, sound arose briefly, the bell, then vanished without echo. Eating occurred. Taste did not linger. Nothing preferred. In the afternoon, the monk walked the lower road. The village rested within itself. Life unfolded without effort. Children moved, paused, moved again. An elder closed his eyes beneath a tree. The shallow crossing no longer stood out. It was river. Feet touched stone. Water flowed. No one crossed. Crossing happened. Beyond the village, the land opened. The monk stood there. Wind moved through grass. Grass moved through wind. There was no boundary. As evening approached, the monk returned. The teacher sat beneath the cedar tree. They did not sit together. They did not stand apart. No words arose. Lanterns were lit. Their glow did not divide light from dark. Night gathered gently. The monk lay down. Sleep did not come. Sleep did not go. Awareness thinned until even awareness was unnecessary. Outside, the river moved, or rested, or neither. No distinction remained to hold the difference. Only this. And this did not need to be known. There was no moment when night became morning, no threshold crossed, no veil lifted. Light existed. Darkness existed. Neither replaced the other. The valley rested inside this indistinction, as though time itself had exhaled and chosen not to inhale again. The monk did not wake. Waking no longer described what occurred. Eyes opened, but there was no sense of opening them. Breath moved, but not as breath, simply as movement, continuing itself. The body lay where it lay, not resting, not active, present without reference. Outside, the temple grounds held their shapes lightly, as if shape were only a suggestion agreed upon by stone, wood, and air. Paths did not lead. Walls did not contain. Sound arose occasionally, a bird, the river, a distant movement. But sound did not arrive anywhere. It appeared and dissolved without distance. The monk stood. Standing occurred. There was no one standing. Movement unfolded, slow and unclaimed. The courtyard appeared. The cedar tree stood. The river could be sensed beyond the slope. Though sensing itself had grown thin, there was no direction. There was no lack of direction. At the slope overlooking the water, the monk paused. Below, the river moved, or perhaps movement lingered as a memory that no longer belonged to anyone. Stones were present. Water was present. The difference between them had softened beyond usefulness. There was no observer. Seeing occurred without center. The teacher was not present. The teacher had not left. That distinction no longer formed. Time did not pass. If moments appeared, they did not accumulate. Eventually, sound arose. The bell. Once. It did not divide anything. It did not mark. It passed through the valley like wind through open grass. Inside the temple, movement continued. A door opened. A door closed. A bowl was lifted. A bowl was set down. Hands moved. No one acted. At midday, light shifted slightly. Shadows moved without purpose. The monk walked the lower path, or the lower path walked itself. The village existed. People moved gently. Children paused near the water. An elder rested beneath a tree. The shallow crossing was simply the river's edge. Feet touched stone. Water touched skin. No crossing occurred. Beyond the village, the land opened wide. Grass bent. Wind passed. There was no sense of standing within the land, only land. As evening softened, the monk returned. A return happened. The temple stood. Lanterns glowed faintly, their light neither bright nor dim. Night did not fall. It settled. The monk lay down. Sleep did not come. Waking did not remain. Awareness thinned until it was no longer useful to name. Outside, the river continued, or rested, or neither. Nothing ended, nothing concluded, nothing needed to. The story did not stop. It simply became indistinguishable from the quiet in which it had always been held. And in that quiet, there was no absence. Only what had always been here, unmoving, unclaimed, at rest. There was no sense that something had already finished. Completion did not appear as an event. What remained did not stand in contrast to what had passed. Light rested in the valley without direction. Shadow rested with it, neither opposing nor yielding. The monk did not rise. Rising no longer described movement. The body shifted, adjusted, breathed, not as an action, but as continuation without ownership. Outside, the temple grounds were unchanged in form, though form itself had grown translucent. Stone suggested solidity. Wood suggested boundary. Neither insisted. Sound arose occasionally, a footstep, a bird, the river, but sound no longer traveled from anywhere to anywhere else. It appeared within openness and dissolved back into it. The monk stood. There was no moment of standing. Uprightness occurred. The courtyard appeared, or perhaps appearance itself was no longer the right word. Space held shape lightly without declaring itself. The cedar tree was present. The slope was present. The river was present. Presence no longer gathered around any of them. The monk moved toward the river. Movement unfolded without path. At the edge of the slope, water could be sensed, not seen, not heard, simply known without recognition. Below, the river moved, or rested, or neither. Stones were there. Water was there. The distinction between them no longer completed itself. There was no one observing. Seeing occurred without reference. Time did not pass. If moments arose, they did not connect. Eventually, the teacher appeared. Or perhaps the idea of the teacher softened into the same openness that held everything else. He stood nearby. No greeting formed. No separation was felt. They did not sit together. They did not stand apart. After a long while, or no while at all, the teacher spoke softly. "When nothing remains to be understood," he said, "nothing remains to be misunderstood." The words did not settle. They dissolved as sound dissolves into air. The teacher turned and walked away, or walking happened, or distance lost its meaning. Nothing followed. The monk remained, or remaining ceased to apply. Movement unfolded again. The temple appeared. The halls were open without being wide. Walls did not enclose. The monk passed through them, or they passed through the monk. A bowl rested on a table. Hands lifted it. It was set down. No one held it. At midday, light shifted slightly. Shadow moved. Neither announced itself. The bell rang once. The sound did not mark time. It did not begin or end anything. It passed. The monk ate. Taste appeared. Taste vanished. No preference arose. In the afternoon, the lower road unfolded. The village existed quietly. People moved without narrative. A child stopped near the river, watching light ripple across water. An elder closed his eyes beneath a tree. The shallow crossing no longer appeared as a feature. It was simply river touching stone. Feet touched. Water touched. No crossing occurred. Beyond the village, open land extended. The monk stood, or standing occurred. Wind moved through grass. Grass moved through wind. No boundary remained. As evening softened, the monk returned, or return occurred. Lanterns glowed faintly. Night did not arrive. It rested. The monk lay down. Sleep did not come. Waking did not remain. Awareness thinned until even thinning was unnecessary. Outside, the river moved, or rested, or neither. Nothing concluded. Nothing continued. Nothing needed to. What remained did not remain as something. It was simply this, unheld, unnamed, without edge. There was no after. There was no before. These ideas no longer formed. Light existed, though it did not arrive. Darkness existed, though it did not remain. Neither replaced the other. Neither needed the other to be defined. The valley rested inside this quiet sameness where difference had softened beyond usefulness. The monk did not wake. Waking was no longer a movement between states. Eyes opened, yet opening did not occur. Breath moved, yet breathing was no longer distinct from air. The body was present, but presence no longer gathered around it. Outside, the temple grounds existed as they always had, though always had thinned into meaninglessness. Stone, wood, water, sky. None asserted themselves. They were. Paths did not lead. Walls did not divide. Names did not cling. The monk stood, or standing occurred, or uprightness simply appeared within space. There was no sense of being here rather than there, no center from which awareness radiated, no edge where it stopped. The river existed, or existence itself moved as river. Water flowed, or rested, or neither. Stones held, or yielded, or neither. The distinction dissolved before it could complete itself. There was no observer. There was no absence of observer. Seeing occurred without seer. Hearing occurred without listener. Being occurred without being held. The teacher did not appear. The teacher did not leave. The teacher had never been separate from what stood here now. time did not pass. If moments arose, they did not connect. If change occurred, it left no trace. The bell did not ring, or the bell rang without sound, or sound no longer required vibration. The temple moved through its own rhythms without instruction. A door opened, a door closed, or opening and closing were simply appearances within space. Hands lifted a bowl. The bowl was set down. No one lifted, no one sat down. Eating occurred. Taste arose, taste dissolved. Nothing preferred, nothing rejected. The village existed, people moved, children paused, elders rested. Or perhaps these were memories of movement that no longer belonged to anyone. The crossing was river. The river was crossing. Feet touched stone. Stone touched water. No crossing happened. Beyond the village, open land stretched outward. Grass bent. Wind moved. Grass and wind did not differ. Standing happened, or standing dissolved. There was no monk standing in the land, only land. Evening did not come. Night did not arrive. Light softened into itself. Darkness softened into itself. Lanterns glowed or did not, without distinction. The monk lay down, or laying down was unnecessary. Sleep did not come. Waking did not remain. Awareness thinned until awareness itself was no longer required, not gone, unneeded. Outside, the river continued, or perhaps the idea of continuing fell away. Nothing ended, nothing persisted, nothing remained, and nothing was lost. There was no story now. There never had been. Only this, ungraspable, unnamed, unmoving, resting exactly as it always had, without reason, without purpose, without separation, and without needing to be known. The story does not end here. It simply no longer needs words. If the body feels heavy, allow it to rest. If the mind feels quiet, let it remain so. Nothing more is required. The breath continues on its own. The room holds its shape. The night moves gently forward. There is no lesson to remember, no meaning to carry away, only a soft understanding that nothing was ever missing. If sleep has arrived, let it deepen. If wakefulness remains, let it be untroubled. The river flows, whether noticed or not. The stars move, whether named or unseen. And this moment, exactly as it is complete. Thank you for spending this quiet time within wisdom and blessing. May rest come naturally. May the night hold you gently. And may the silence remain long after the sound fades.